has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night.
This poem by Langston Hughes, Democracy, is taken from the 30 Days of Love 2022 program. Democracy will not come today, this year, nor ever through compromise and fear. I have as much right as the other fellow has to stand on my 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed, planted in a great need. I live here too. I want freedom, just as you.
Our Time for All Ages today is going to look at what it means to protest. In the last few years, we've seen many different instances of ways to speak out, to use your voice, and to protest. A protest can be silent, quiet, or it can be very, very loud. We may yell. We can even give someone the silent treatment. We can protest within our families, in marriages, in friendships. We can protest at work and at school. We are usually protesting ideas or behaviors that we disagree with or that we think are unfair. Some of you have been involved in organized protests in different stages of your lives. I know that my children were both part of different protests at their high schools to protest against gun violence, and they were both involved in the Black Lives Matter protests in Cleveland a few years ago, just 2 years ago. I myself started protesting in my early 20s for reproductive justice and understood really the power of coming together as a group. And I've continued to learn and grow and use my voice to protest or advocate for many, many different kinds of justice issues. And protest has helped me understand what it means to be active in a democracy. We are seeing more and more protests by students. And I want to share a story with you today about a high school student in Texas named India Landry. She protested the rule that she had to stand up and recite the Pledge of Allegiance in her high school every morning. India said that she was inspired by the NFL players who decided to kneel during the national anthem as a form of protest, to protest racial injustices specifically. India said, "I feel the flag doesn't represent what it stands for, liberty and justice for all, And I don't feel what is going on in the country is fair. So it was my choice to remain seated silently, she said. It was a silent protest. India shared that she had protested the pledge about 200 times without any incident at her high school. But then one day, she engaged in the silent protest when she was in the principal's office during the time for the Pledge of Allegiance. The principal immediately expelled her from school, saying, "You're kicked out of here." And the school secretary intoned, "This isn't the NFL." India was expelled from her high school for refusing to stand. She was ordered off school property by the principal, and the principal even threatened to call the police if she did not leave of her own free will. India missed her graduation in 2018, not because of COVID, but because of her decision to really use her conscience to guide her actions. India did settle her lawsuit because in 1943, the U.S. Supreme Court justices had already ruled that schools could not require students to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. This ruling, written almost 80 years ago, helps us understand that the right to abstain from expressing what is not in one's heart and mind applies to school children as well as adults. As citizens of the United States, we have the right to protest if we are being required to think in a way that we feel is not aligned with our values and our conscience and what we know to be true for ourselves. Our religious values must be in line with the idea of the rights of citizenship as well. And they are, in fact, our fifth principle states the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. So today in this service, we're going to be looking at how artists in particular help us see new ways to use our conscience to explore the idea of protest and justice and intention. In particular, the life and art of the Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei will be explored in the sermon, and you will see examples of his artwork and many more artists throughout the slideshow. But for now, keep in mind that we can protest in many different ways, and that agitation is really essential to make sure democracy lives up to its potential. I am so grateful that I am part of a religious tradition that understands the important links between freedom and justice and human flourishing.
We'll build a land
Before I entered the ministry, I worked in the field of arts education for many, many years. I worked as a museum educator, as a teaching artist, and I also worked as an executive director, placing artists in schools to make sure that children had access to music and poetry and movement and theater and the visual arts. I have a deep appreciation for how the arts and different artistic visions help us make sense of the world and help us to enlarge our imagination. Music and singing and poetry and visual arts help us access ideas and emotions in ways that we can't describe. And that's why we need the arts. And I've also found in my years of ministry that the arts can very much help propel our social justice efforts, and they can help us build community. And particularly in this time of COVID, when we are feeling so isolated, I have found great respite and great inspiration in immersing myself in different art media and cinema and learning and reading about different artists. I have been greatly impacted by an artist, a Chinese dissident artist named Ai Weiwei. Some of you may be familiar with his work, and for others, this might be an introduction for you. I have traveled around the country to see his artwork in different installations, and some of you may remember a few years ago at the Cleveland Museum of Art, outside in the garden, they had 12 of his zodiac animal sculptures on pedestals. And they had them there for several months, and it was really beautiful to see. My husband and I are not big on Christmas presents, but each year we tend to give each other a book. And this year, the book that I chose was Ai Weiwei's new memoir, 1,000 Years of Joys and Sorrow. And the title of his book was taken from a poem by his father. His father was actually a very famous writer and scholar and teacher and poet. And his father is now deceased, but his father was also, during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, was sent to the re-education camps for many, many years. And so much of Ai Weiwei's childhood was spent in these Chinese gulags where they had very little to eat. They literally lived in an earthen cave, and one of the main foods that they subsisted on was sunflower seeds. They were often very cold, and there was not a lot of formal education. Ai Weiwei himself has been imprisoned and beaten while he still lived in China, once so severely that he required emergency brain surgery. But he has remained an outspoken critic of Chinese policies that limit personal freedom and expression and democracy. Throughout his troubles, Weiwei has commented that he draws strength from the conscience that kept his father's dignity intact in the re-education camps. Ai Weiwei works in many mediums: sculpture, ceramics, film, video, photography, music, and very, very large-scale installation. He was able to move from China to New York City in his 20s and spent 11 years in New York City as a young, struggling artist. And it was actually in New York City that he began to be really curious, and he began to understand how art can be used to document and to propel social agendas and the voices of the marginalized to a larger audience. And technology has also helped him with that. After living in New York City, he returned back to China for many, many years. And he now lives in Germany, which is a safe place for him to live and create his art. He has been invited to create art in many, many countries. And in fact, when he was still living in China, he was on the architectural team that helped design and build the famous Bird's Nest Stadium for the 2008 Beijing Olympics. In 2014 and 2015, he was invited to create a large-scale art installation here in the United States at Alcatraz, the old federal prison right off San Francisco. And this installation was called Ai Weiwei at Large. And Weiwei's goal for this project was to highlight the plight of thousands of imprisoned people around the world who, like himself, have risked their personal safety to speak truth to power. The site, Alcatraz, is obviously not a coincidence. Alcatraz itself has a long history of protest. It was once a military prison. In the late 1900s, Alcatraz imprisoned Hopi elders who refused to send their children to government-sponsored schools where they would not be allowed to speak their native Hopi language. During World War I, Alcatraz held the Conscientious Observers, and in 1969 it was closed and taken over by Native American freedom fighters who were seeking justice for indigenous peoples. Now, in 2014 and 2015, because Alcatraz had been closed for many years, the California State Parks reopened it, and Ai Weiwei was able to use all of the different parts of the island and the prison for this installation. I was able to attend, and I spent all day there, really immersed in this incredible interactive exhibit. As you enter the exhibit, you are greeted by an enormous Chinese dragon kite. And the dragon, of course, represents this mythical symbol of power and fierceness. The body of the dragon is actually made up of beautifully painted smaller kites. And they're designed with birds and flowers, many of which are symbols from countries that have a history of restricting the civil liberties of their citizens. Some of the countries that are referenced in this artwork include Cameroon, China, Indonesia, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Uzbekistan. One of the installation pieces that resonated very, very deeply with me was called Stay Tuned. This part of the large installation took place in the actual cell blocks in the older part of the prison. Stay Tuned is a sound installation. 12 prison cells in what was once a block in this massive, concrete, very old-fashioned style cell house were opened for visitors to enter. And you could sit or stand and listen to spoken word, poetry, and music created by people who have been detained for the creative expression of their beliefs. And sometimes they're even able to work and create while they were imprisoned. You can encounter protesters as diverse as the Russian rock group Pussy Riot, who sing to oppose the tactics of the autocratic ruler Vladimir Putin, and the Robben Island singers who were incarcerated during apartheid-era South Africa. The voices of political prisoners from around the globe can be heard singing, talking, reciting poetry in what was once a very silent, abandoned prison. Because for many years, even while prisoners were at Alcatraz, it was a silent prison. The prisoners were not allowed to talk. So one of the ideas of Weiwei is to kind of give these ghosts of Alcatraz voice and to immerse these cell blocks with sound. I heard these voices from Pussy Riot when they protested Putin and the complicity of the leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church in his agenda. And these were taken from a kind of an installation in which they kind of took over the Moscow's Cathedral of Christ, the Savior. They dressed up as just regular visitors, and then at a certain signal, they actually pulled out their instruments and they went right up into the nave of the church and they began singing. Listen to these lyrics. Virgin Mother of God, put Putin away, put Putin away, put Putin away. Black robes, golden epaulets, all parishioners crawl to bow. The phantom of liberty is in heaven, gay pride sent to Siberia in chains. The head of the KGB, their chief saint, leads protesters to prison under escort in order not to offend His Holiness. Women must give birth and love. 2 members of Pussy Riot were imprisoned for 2 years for this song and for singing it in public in this church. They were both very young women, and one had to actually give her child to friends to care for 2 years when she was carted away to the Russian gulags in Siberia. If you're interested, I highly recommend this book, Riot Days, by Maria Alikina, and she documents her saga as a member of the singing group and her time in the gulag. In another cell, I was able to listen to the music of Victor Jara, a Chilean singer and songwriter. And in the days following the US-backed military coup of September 1973, he was arrested, imprisoned, and ultimately murdered. Yet his voice and words live on in these lyrics. My guitar is not for the rich. No, nothing like that. My song is of the ladder we are building to reach the stars. For a song has meaning when it beats in the veins of a man who will die singing, truthfully singing his songs. And while you are listening to the voices, you are inhabiting these cells, and you're imagining what life would be like as a prisoner here at Alcatraz, or anywhere, as a prisoner being in prison simply for giving voice or giving expression to your conscience, to what you believe is truth and fairness, and how we inhabit this world, this globe, and how we treat each other as human beings. And you can look at your own hands and legs, and you hear the voices, these murmurings of not only the person in your cell, but the voices and the music from cell to cell to cell. And it's really this completely immersive experience. And you're compelled to examine your own conscience and to think about, what would you willingly give up? What would you lose to sustain your ideas of freedom and liberty? And as an American citizen, I have never been in a position where I've had to think too hard about what I would lose, what I would be willing to lose to give expression to what I hold to be most sacred and most truthful to me. Ai Weiwei says that this show in particular is about freedom, but as a student of Ai Weiwei and a student of protest art, I really believe that everything that he does is about freedom. He has wonderful documentaries about taking care of the refugees that have washed ashore in Greece. He has done documentaries about the schools that collapsed during the awful earthquake in China and the over 700 school children that perished. He has done videos about climate change. This is really a man who is working on a grand scale when it comes to who do we want to be as a people. And Ai Weiwei says, I do this, and he's done this at great personal risk to himself, which is why he's now living in Germany. He says, I have an obligation to speak out on the behalf of all of these people who have been silenced, and particularly the people who have been silenced when their life was taken. And I think that Ai Weiwei's work calls us all to ask, what is my obligation to ensure that there is justice for people not only in our own country, but around the globe? And we have seen some of our personal liberties become more and more at risk here in the United States when unnamed police can roam the streets of our cities and fire weapons and pick up people at will, as we've seen in some of the protests over the past 2 years. This is the beginning of life in a police state. And I have to say that there are many, many artists that have moved me. I've really highlighted Ai Weiwei here, but I would like to highlight one other artist who probably most of you know, and that is Sidney Poitier. And his death last week really helped me reevaluate what his role was. And I listened to some podcasts and read some editorials about his work. And I've seen most of his major films, of course, and my husband and I rewatched To Sir with Love last weekend. But who can forget, honestly, the scene from In the Heat of the Night, when, as a young Black officer in the South, he is interrogating a character named Mr. Endicott, a character of great white privilege and wealth. And he is slapped in the face by Mr. Endicott for asking him simply about his whereabouts in a routine police investigation in the film. And reflexively, Sidney Poitier's character, Mr. Tibbs, slaps him back. This slap was not originally in the screenplay, and Sidney Poitier had to fight to explain why that slap back was so necessary. And when I think about the graceful way, but yet the steely way that Sidney Poitier portrayed Black people in film, it was an eye-opening experience to reevaluate. And it just shows how cinema is another great way of expression for our artists. And so I invite you to take some time during these cold months to revisit some of these Sidney Poitier's films, if perhaps Ai Weiwei is not to your taste, but to look at artists that you may know and love, and during the slideshow that Halcyona's put together, perhaps learn about some new artists. When I encounter art installations like Ai Weiwei, or the music of Pussy Riot, or Victor Jara, or, as I mentioned, watch films by Sidney Poitier, I'm so re-inspired at the many ways that we can give voice and expression to calls for justice and to express our own conscience. And some of you may be artists yourself, and particularly in this time when we're feeling isolated, I encourage you to go back to your art's roots and find new ways to express yourself, and maybe to begin to communicate with each other around topics that are very, very important to you. And I want you to continue to ask this question: what keeps us from working for the liberation of people, and for the liberation, for the right of all people to be able to express their views and their conscience? And I want us to continue to be asking these questions and to be supporting each other with our fifth principle, the right to conscience in everything that we do, not only in our congregations, but in our society. So may it be.
Be About the Work by Andrea Hawkins Camper. May we see all as it is, and may it all be as we see it. May we be the ones to make it as it should be. For if not us, who? If not now, when? This is answering the cry of justice with the work of peace. This is redeeming the pain of history with the grace of wisdom. This is the work we are called to do, and this is the call we answer now. To be the barrier and the bridge, to be the living embodiment of our principles, to be about the work of building the beloved community, to be a people of intention and a people of conscience. This is who we are and who we want to be, and we need to have the financial ability to do so. Please send in your pledges or free will offerings to the address on the screen. If this is your first time with us, then please just enjoy. If you are visiting us time and again, please support us so that we may bring more services to you. Thank you.
Hold on to me, don't let me go. Who cares what they see? Who cares what they know? Your first name is free, last name is dumb. But you still believe in where we're from. Man's white flower, it's in every living thing. Mind, use your power. Spirit, use your wings. Hold on to me, don't let me go. Cheetahs need to eat, run antelope. Your first name is King, last name is Dumb. Cause you still believe in everyone. When the baby first breathes, when night sees sunrise, when the whale hugs the sea, when man recognizes freedom, breathe in. We are from heat, the electric one. Just a shock you see. He left us the sun. Atoms in the air, organisms in the sea. Sun and yes man are made of the same things. Freedom, 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 freedom.
In keeping with today's theme, I offer this benediction from the Reverend Tanya Marquez entitled, Do Not Fear Agitation. Do not fear agitation, for agitation is the rhythm of life itself, to be put into motion, to be stirred. Do not fear the movements that decenter what you always thought permanent. You carry within the center of your understanding the compass to show you the way. Carry with you the love that will hold you, the vision that will guide you, the relationships to all beings and the world itself that will ground you. Go in peace and in gentle agitation, to stir this world to the side of love. Amen, and blessed be, and go in peace.
We join hands in Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom which transcends all creeds, not to think alike, but to journey together.
Our link, our light. An ominous cloud overshadows our nation, tearing our sanctuary into a land of division, threatening our ideals, fueling separation, eroding our abode's democratic foundation. When enduring perpetual bias and braving unjust aggression, we battle misguided ignorance and face incessant oppression. While privileged people in power pretend and ponder wide-eyed, there are some like Amanda Gorman, unleashing words to heal the divide. With a fire in her soul, the fearless Harvard graduate, with dreams in her eyes, the inaugural poet laureate, ignited a spark and filled our hearts with hope, faith, and resolution, striving to awaken our sleeping society, intimidating injustice by inspiring inclusion. She urges us to climb our hills, to make mountains as we run, and marvel at life's miracles with harmony for all and harm to none. The weaving and wielding of her words creates a vivid tapestry, this ensemble made colorful by our shared Black history, entwining the threads of our American fabric with stories of slaves singing spiritual songs, of protesters marching to redress grievous wrongs, and of poets discovering where their people belong. Descended from slaves, raised by a single mother, this unstoppable inspiration, unlike any other, spreads her message through verse and rhyme, emanating warmth in such a tumultuous time. Asserting not all is gloomy and doomed, looking beyond the haze into the clear bloom of stories and messages being shared with the world. In our land of opportunity and freedom of words, we must never forget. We are united as one with Black history, our link, our light for everyone.